Thank you. Thanks, Mike. Welcome to Supercomputing. Welcome to New Orleans, everybody. I hope everyone's having a fun start out to the conference. I am Addison Snell with Intersect360 Research. We are a market advisory service, research, and consulting practice specific to the high-performance computing industry. In industry parlance, that technically makes us meta-nerds. Our approach to the market is to be very inclusive from both a technology standpoint and a usage case standpoint, looking at all of the technologies that comprise the HPC market as well as all of the different usage types that comprise HPC. We've seen a growing amount of what we term edge HPC areas that fall outside the traditional boundaries of science and engineering and analytics, and those form a strong part of our research going forward as well. We have an exclusive market research relationship with HPC Wire, and that worldwide reader database drives and informs a lot of our research on a regular basis. We do market sizing work, forecasting work, and analysis for a wide range of technologies, as well as internally spent items like staffing and facilities. Staff is myself, my partner, Chris Willard, who's in the back over here, Laura Segerval, and Sue Korn up front here. So the four of us all meta-nerds. Quick HPC market overview for you. In 2009, we of course haven't put the wraps on 2010 yet. 2009, it was a little more than an $18.5 billion industry in product and services spending. The majority of that, about 80%, falling into what we would call traditional HPC. That's science and engineering and analytics types of applications, which of course includes a lot of commercial markets. It's more than half commercial in traditional areas like manufacturing and oil and gas. There are a lot of large commercial users that still fit inside of traditional. Then I mentioned these edge HPC markets, which is things like complex event processing, including high-frequency trading on Wall Street, business process optimization, online games like massive multiplayer online games, the back ends behind those. Form the other 20% of the market, forecast to grow 7.8% from now through 2014. That's a little higher than normal, primarily because we're coming out of a dip from the recession, and a lot of that dip has to do with a lengthening of sales cycles, and as sales cycles speed up again, you pick up some of the lost sales. The top 5 commercial vertical markets, which get a lot of attention if you start splitting them out, if you include both the traditional and edge HPC use cases, that's what promotes finance to being all the way up to number 2. Manufacturing, if you include both large product manufacturing like cars and planes, along with consumer product manufacturing like toilet paper and potato chips, takes the number 1 spot. Online games is also surprisingly high. There are a lot of very big systems out there doing that. It's not a very differentiated play though a lot of the time, so we don't see a lot of talk about it at shows like Supercomputing, but nevertheless an important market. One thing that's very important to consider, though, as vendors approach this market is they have very different approaches to how they do their research. Something like computation, or something like structures, or even computational fluid dynamics, which are common in the engineering space. Those blue fields represent commercial off-the-shelf software. It's purchased software that they run, and that's where you get things like software licensing, software pricing is a dominant part of the conversation. If you go into other areas like oil and gas, finance would also be a similar profile. Most of the codes being run are in-house codes that are the users are writing them themselves, and then biosciences has yet a different profile, with the lion's share of it coming from open source or public codes, public being a variety of open source where they're licensed to commercial organizations, but fundamentally open source. One of the top topics of conversation this supercomputing, of course, is GPU computing, capturing a lot of attention thanks to the top of the top 500 list. Now, the top 500 list is great for some things and not great for other things, but there you have it, right at the top of the list is a very large, very high peak power Chinese supercomputer, Tianhe, leveraging the GPU accelerators to get that performance. The traditional barriers to GPU or to any type of accelerator, whether a GPU or another type, have been finding out how to program them, overcoming the latency barrier of getting a piece of your code to them and back, writing applications, and also, very important, the pace of development of the chip itself. A lot of custom accelerator companies have trouble because they can't maintain the pace of development of an Intel or an AMD in the long term. NVIDIA doesn't really have that because they're designing GPUs for the general gaming market. So they've got the pace of development, and they've also gone a long way to address a lot of these other barriers with CUDA and some of their other technologies. We're seeing an awful lot of testing of GPUs now in the market. In our last survey, 20% of systems reported having at least some attached accelerator in some quantity. These are mostly testing, not full-scale deployment. But nevertheless, there's a lot of testing going on out there, and this is something where, as we see increasing levels of interest and we see the systems at the top of the top 500 list, one thing that has been traditionally true in this industry is that eventually speed wins. And you can say things about, well, it's not as efficient or it's harder to program. The same things were said about clusters as they took over from SMPs. The same things were said about scalar as they took over from vector. So I myself am starting to come around the bend a little bit on this and say the more of this we see where they really go fast, people might buy them and say, let's figure out how to program them. That said, we're likely to see various levels of responses. In particular, one of the questions is, will we see national responses to China being on top of the supercomputer list, both at the large-scale national lab level as well as a large part of the conversation right now is whether there's a gap in what frequently gets called the missing middle, but what we call the entry level or mid-range of the HPC space. As we see our people throughout the manufacturing supply chain or smaller U.S. manufacturers adopting digital manufacturing or computer-aided engineering technologies, HPC at some level. We did do a study in conjunction with the National Center for Manufacturing Sciences, who's a not-for-profit that has a great deal of connectivity throughout the supply chain, and we're able to show conclusively the very wide gap in digital manufacturing adoption between large companies and small. Quick note of the columns there, the far left set of columns, modeling and simulation HPC, those are people who are doing any type of HPC at any level. Could be a small cluster with only a few nodes up to a large supercomputer. Then we see the sub-entry levels going out to the right, people who are doing computer-aided engineering at some level, but only on a desktop, people who are doing 3D CAD, people who are doing 2D CAD, so the different levels of technology penetration. And what we really see is that HPC is well penetrated for the large companies. It's very mature in manufacturing. It's been going on for decades, but it is not well penetrated at all among the small companies. And we really do quantitatively see this gap in adoption of digital manufacturing. Some of the drivers and barriers, there's a question, well, do they need it? But even if you go down to the bottom of that chain and look at companies, manufacturing companies who are only doing 2D CAD, they cite high product quality as the top factor for their business strategies and long development cycles as the most common limitation to development and production, which lines up very well with the benefits that HPC promises to deliver. However, they also have significant barriers: the cost of hardware, the cost of software, the lack of expertise, the need to coordinate physical and digital results. And it only takes one barrier. It's all very nice to go in and say, well, I'll solve one of those barriers for you. I could say, I'd really like to be the Queen of France. And you could come and tell me all of the wonderful reasons why it would be good for me to be the Queen of France, and I could be convinced that that's an excellent thing to be. There are nevertheless a number of barriers. And you could say, well, I'll give you French citizenship. Excellent. There goes one barrier off the list. There's still more. It really only takes one barrier if it's a showstopper to keep you off the list. So we've done a study on cloud computing in HPC, which is sometimes cited as one of the ways that people might adopt high-performance computing for the first time. Again, same thing, a lot of good ideas, a lot of barriers. We're seeing a lot of experimentation around cloud, not a lot of wide-scale deployments. Cloud computing is another area where HPC presents some very particular challenges. We have a whole set of selected user comments on cloud that run the gamut of barriers that fall into security category, problems with certification or reproducibility of results, problem with moving data in and out of the cloud, problems with operations, how do I take part of my workflow out and bring it back in, political problems, managerial problems inside the company of how do I know I'm not going to get fired if I do this and something goes wrong, SLAs. So, you know, there's work to do there as well. Other technology issues, just wrapping up because they're important topics this year. Intel does have a growing market share over AMD. Now, I don't hear a lot of people saying bad things about AMD technology itself. They're very well reviewed, but nevertheless, some of the differentiation that Intel has shown on the software and tool side in particular has contributed to their market share lead. InfiniBand is the most common cluster interconnect, slightly over Ethernet, and is starting to see a growing presence over Ethernet. There are also custom interconnects that are worth considering, of course, from companies like Cray or SGI or IBM with BlueGene, or even T-Platforms now out of Russia with their own system interconnect for the larger systems. So those are important to consider. And one of my favorite topics for the last couple of years has been Windows, which around this group is generally good enough to get several people to spit on the floor. Windows is coming, and we see it with a growing share, and it's been growing. It's not that far penetrated in yet, but Windows is another key technology in terms of helping to enable adoption for HPC users in the entry level and mid-range who don't have any Linux in their data center. We have a number of research studies, both in terms of annual syndicated studies and comprehensive research studies that go above and beyond that. You can browse all of our research on our website at intersect360.com. We've even taken to putting out some HPC trivia cards out on some of the tables, a little game for you. There's 4 different cards with 3 questions each that are all answered by different research reports that we've put out all in 2010. I'm very excited to be at Supercomputing. This is my absolute favorite time of year. As analysts, the number of people we would like to meet with is limited only to all of the vendors, all of the users, all of the press, and all of the policymakers. So we do have a very busy schedule. I hope to talk to all of you at some point in time. If not here, then please contact us, and thanks very much. I hope you have a great show.